What I always wanted to know is, how do working class people experience history? How do they shape it? How do they contribute to the active making of history? And the Amistad case is a perfect example of that.
The Amistad, or La Amistad, which is Spanish for friendship, was a Spanish slave ship that was the scene of one of the most well-known slave uprisings of the 1800s that would eventually lead to the Supreme Court of the United States and a remarkable ruling. On June 27, 1839, the Amistad departed from Havana, Cuba, carrying 49 enslaved Mende people who had been kidnapped in Sierra Leone and forced into slavery. Now in Cuba, they were on the Amistad being taken to the island of Puerto Rico to be sold. The voyage would take 4 days, and at some point during the voyage, the ship's cook had told the enslaved passengers who were shackled in chains that they were going to be eaten by the crew of the ship.
Capturing a slave ship was very hard to do. Hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands of people had tried to do that, and the overwhelming majority of them failed.
Produced by Dane Calloway and Taneisha Calloway. Watch this brand new documentary, Mother Rosa, right now at DaneMakeYouThink.com.
Capturing a slave ship was very hard to do. Hundreds upon hundreds, if not thousands of people had tried to do that, and the overwhelming majority of them failed. So why were they successful? How did they do it?
So the very first thing they would have done is to elect a leader. Or they could have asked questions around. So who among us has any war experience?
What would be the qualities or the characteristics of a great Mende warrior?
Okay, you must have some cultural talisman in your neck or somewhere in your body. You should always have it.
They can go and then
make
do some cultural performances on your body, on a shirt, then give you some certain things. If you have it, they can even point gun at you. Nothing will happen to you.
That's
because we usually do it. So in the olden days, they were having almost the same thing.
A slave is someone who is subservient to or controlled by another, often without even realizing it. For example, if someone openly asks you to be their slave, most people would say no. But if you think of yourself as their friend or helper, you might do things for them willingly, believing it's for a good cause. If the targeted individual, who will be recognized as the slave, sees his or herself as a companion or even a friend, they give of themselves freely, of their time and energy, sometimes not counting the hours or tallying it as a specified debt. The person who is controlling, also known as the master, knows exactly what they're doing from the beginning, almost like a hunter with its prey. In these situations, a person might think they're being kind and helpful, but the master is actually using them for their own benefit. This is called manipulation, which is the act of skillfully using people, and it is properly defined as the skillful handling or managing of persons, especially to one's own advantage. This is the same type of relationship that occurs between a supervisor or a manager and the employees at work. And there are many jobs where people need to be good at manipulation. Upon hearing this, I'm sure that the title of sculptor is the last career field that may come to your mind. when speaking about master manipulators within the realm of the master-slave relationship. But if you can recall, in a previous video, I spoke about this when I described that a slave is actually a slob. In that particular video, I stated that due to betacism, the V and the B becomes interchangeable, meaning depending on the pronunciation or the particular accent of a person being from certain countries or other locations, you may hear one or the other, which is a slave being pronounced as Slav or Slob. The goal is to make the person a slob. And to some people, those who are a slob are perceived as being lazy. But what is really happening is a mass production of people who wait. Or people who wait. Because if you are a slob or a person who waits, you are not taking action. And this is what keeps you subservient. So back to the sculptor. A sculptor needs the slob, visually seen here as a slab of mud. And etymologically speaking, the word slab itself, also pronounced as slob, ties itself with a scalpel, seen here as a scalpel. The sculptor uses the scalpel to cut and shape. He's a master manipulator. But who else uses the scalpel? Ah, yes, the doctor. And this doctor too. So what's another name for a sculptor? Well, a mason. Someone who is very familiar with the slob, as he uses it to shape walls of stone. So let's talk about who else is deemed to be a master manipulator. The salesman, for being aggressive and dishonest. He is also someone who is skilled with social dealings between people because they are skilled in commerce and trading. They are master manipulators. But what many are unaware of is that the bad rap of a salesman came from the historical context, because a salesman is actually a salesman, which is synonymous with the slave master, the employer, and the captain of a merchant ship. The salesman used manipulation and promises of all kinds to gather a crew and to get people on board a slave ship.
Open your ears, men. The meter needs 3 able-bodied seamen. Bound for London, paying gold.
I am able and strong as an ox.
This tactic is more prevalent than the use of chains and shackles, as each man on board is needed to contribute in some type of way. The scene that just played was from within a movie that I watched some time ago, named The Dementor, and it shows the type of interactions that were prevalent amongst sailors in the past. The targeted individuals, who were later known as slaves, boarded the ship to be a part of its crew. Many times these people were finagled into greater hardships than expected due to the weather or other unsuspecting circumstances. But because they were now considered as business partners and had to stay in close quarters for long periods of time, this helped to form the bond of friendships. They freely gave of themselves, of their time, and their energy, truly believing it was for the greater good of the entire crew. Now, doesn't that seem more like what could have possibly happened in the past? When they claimed to have picked up so-called slaves on the way to America, with them traveling and bringing different people of different ethnicities to work for them? They don't really care what someone looks like, only that they are willing to help them do the job. Now that we've gone over all of that, I want you to realize something and think about the slave story itself and how it's meant for children. It's told to them the way that it is, because only those who are young in the mind can easily be tricked and used. But while they are explaining the slave trade and the story of the slaves, what they didn't tell you before leaving the port, they had to account for the amount of food that they had on board, and even what they had for themselves usually wasn't enough. So how do you get more food without adding additional weight?
The voyage would take 4 days, and at some point during the voyage, the ship's cook had told the enslaved passengers who were shackled in chains that they were going to be eaten by the crew of the ship.
And I say this because we're talking about people traveling with the same people who were willing to eat their shoes and their belts. That just means that many times they didn't actually pick up slaves for the purpose of work. And if you go back and read, you'll see them stating these things, like how a particular person is considered to be 3/5 of a man, or how they traded people for food stuff. It's just that upon hearing these things, people didn't think about it that way. Because isn't the same thing happening today? I'm just here to make you think.